Hi, I'm Ian Gilmore with Redline Engineering and RedlineStands.com, and we're getting ready to install a 2-post lift. And the first thing that you need to determine before you ever even purchase your lift is your concrete going to be strong enough and thick enough? And the lift that you're about to see us put up today is a 9,000-pound 2-post clear floor lift. The concrete requirements for this lift, as is the same concrete requirements for many but not all lifts, is that your concrete be 4 inches thick, 3,000 psi tensile strength or stronger, and that it must be reinforced with wire mesh, fiberglass, rebar, something of that nature so that the concrete is reinforced. So let me show you the first thing that you need to do to make sure that your concrete is thick enough that you can even put in a lift is you take a hammer drill and put a piece of tape around a masonry bit, in this case for the lift that we're about to do at 4 inches from the tip. And so I'm about to start drilling into the concrete, and you're going to feel, if it were to hit dirt and go all the way through the slab before you made it to 4 inches, you would all of a sudden feel the hammer drill would sound different, it would feel different, dirt would start coming up out of the hole instead of concrete dust. If that should happen, your concrete is not thick enough. So let's test this concrete here to see if that's the case. Okay, so I've tested the concrete. You can see my bit went all the way into the concrete until it finally stopped and there was no more bit to go. I never hit dirt. There was concrete dust coming out of the hole the entire time, which means that this concrete slab is at least thick enough. It is at least 4 inches thick, probably thicker. So let's do our lift installation. And today we're putting up a 9,000-pound 2-post clear floor style lift. I've got both of our towers broken down from their shipping form. Everything's now separated. And the first thing that we've got to do is take our tower extensions, which you're going to see inside the tower here. It's actually inverted up inside the tower. And the first thing I'm going to do is take this extension and flip it around and install it on the top. Okay, so now that I've got my tower extensions on, the reason I've done this down on the ground is because the last thing you want to do is stand up these towers and then try and haul these tower extensions up a ladder to bolt them onto the top of this tower while you're on a ladder. So now that we've got that done, it's time for us to stand up our towers, pop a chalk line on the floor, and measure out everything to make sure we know exactly where we want the lift, that they're spaced the correct distance apart. So let's do it. Okay, so now that we've got our tower extensions put on, now it's time to stand up the towers. I'm going to stand them up with 2 men, and then we're just going to kind of shimmy and walk the towers over to the general area where we want the lift to go. Then we're going to pop the chalk line. So let's stand up the towers. Now we're going to pop a chalk line. We've measured the proper distance away from the wall. We've put marks on the ground, and now we're just going to pop us a chalk line right here. And that gives us a reference point with which to line up the towers. Let's go ahead and scoot the towers into place along the chalk line. Alright, now that we've got our lift lined up with our edges on our chalk line, now we're going to measure. This particular lift, the outside of the base plate to the outside of the base plate, is 134.5 inches. Check your manual to see what the proper width of the lift is that you buy. Alright, we need to shimmy in about 2.5 inches. Okay, so now that we've got our towers lined up with our chalk line, they're spaced the correct distance apart, they're the proper distance inside the shop from each end in this case. The next thing to do is to put our bar across the top. And the first thing that we notice is this tower here is leaning way backwards because the concrete is not even close to level. And so if we were to carry that bar up there and try and put it in place right now, it wouldn't fit because the 2 towers are kind of doing like that thanks to the concrete not being level. So what we're going to do is just put a few dummy shims underneath it to lean the tower inward. Some more. And then check to see what we've got. And we're pretty good at this point. So now Okay, so now it's time to put together our overhead bar. In this case, this is a 2-piece bar. Some lifts have a 1-piece bar, and you don't have to do this. We want to point out that as we're putting these pieces together, that we're going to take the bolts here, and we're going to put them in so that they point out and that the bolts do not point inward. We found that by doing this, it helps keep those bolts from rubbing up against the hydraulic lines and the equilibrium cables, and helps keep things from rubbing. Okay, so now we're ready to put our top crossbar in place. Be careful as you're doing this, because the towers are not secured into concrete yet. They're not anchored into place, and so it's very easy for something to shimmy just a little bit and cause that top bar to fall if you don't get it set in place with bolts first. So just be careful as you're doing this. Make sure to do it with 2 people. Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so now it's time to set one tower into concrete. One of the worst things that you could ever do is just go ahead and drill every hole that there is to do all at once, both towers at the same time. There's a lot of reasons that will mess you up, and we're going to go through those. The first thing we're going to do is drill one hole, just one to start. We're going to put one anchor in. You need to make sure that when you drill this hole, you go very, very deep. Don't go 4 inches. Try and go 6 inches or maybe even all the way through the slab. Last thing you ever want to do is not drill the hole deep enough. Put the anchor in there, the anchor won't go down far enough, and now it won't come back out, and you can't pull it back out to drill the hole deeper, and you're screwed. So let's go ahead and drill us a hole. Okay, now we're going to blow the dust out of the hole. It's important to do because if you don't, the anchor won't be able to go all the way down into the hole because of all the dust in there. So we're going to blow the dust out. Now let's talk about putting in the concrete anchors. The next thing I want to show is the epoxy that I like to use is called AC 100 Plus Gold. This is not necessarily mandatory that you use, any epoxy with these anchors, but it's what I like to use after years of experience. You're not going to find this at Home Depot and Lowe's. You're going to have to go to a professional contractor supply house to find this. It's expensive. It's probably $25 a tube, but it's money well spent to make sure that your anchors don't loosen up on you over time. So, let's go ahead and do some of this. Now, with the epoxy still wet, I'm going to go ahead and pull tight on the anchor so that it sets in place with the epoxy wet. Be warned that in the summertime, that epoxy will set up in about 30 seconds. So thankfully here it's winter and we have some time. Okay, so now we've got 2 anchors in place. Now that we have 2 anchors in place, now you can drill the rest of the holes. The last thing you would ever want to do is drill all the holes at once because they certainly would not line up. So you drill one hole, put one anchor in, drill another hole, put that anchor in, and then at that time it won't move and you can drill the rest. So we're going to lift up the carriage so that we can access and drill the rest of the holes. And so the safety locks will keep the carriage from coming back down. And that's it. Okay, now that we've got our opposite tower set into concrete, we've used shims to stand the tower perfectly straight upright, and we've got it to where it's not going to move. We know it's where it's going to be. We've got our bar across the top. Now what we have to do is shimmy the base of this tower to get it so that it's perfectly straight up and down also. So at this point we're going to take our 134.5 inches that we started off with spacing, and we're going to adjust that a little bit in order to make sure that this tower is straight up and down. So the way we're going to do that, put a piece of wood and bump the tower over. And we're finally good and level. So now it's time to start sinking this tower into the concrete with anchors. Now that we've got all of our anchors in place, it's time to go ahead and torque them. This particular lift calls for 150 foot-pounds of torque on the anchors. I'm going to go ahead and set my torque wrench here to 150 foot-pounds. Now you'll want to check the specification of your lift, because not all of them are set to 150 foot-pounds. That's just what this one requires. Be sure to apply Teflon tape to all hydraulic hoses, as is done here. Route your hydraulic line through the supplied grommet and through the overhead bar. Now it's time to route the cables. Your instruction manual will show you how your cables are routed. This is real easy. They already come partially installed. And the first thing you want to notice here is that in this case, the cable is not over the pulley, so needs to be over the pulley. And then go ahead and pull it tight to where it's around the pulley. At that time, I'm going to take the end of the cable, move my ladder into place, and route it. Okay, now it's time to put the arms in place. I've pre-greased the holes of the arms and the carriages. This is going to make getting the arms in place a lot easier. This is a two-man job. Now it's time for us to hang the power unit. One of the worst things that we see people try and do is to hang a power unit with just one person. If you drop the power unit, it's very easy to bust the pump or the reservoir and ruin the entire power unit. So make sure you do this with two men. Now it's time for us to put the safety arm locks in place. And this is very simple. You just pull off the spring and the washer, put it through like so, run it on down, and then I'm going to take the spring and the washer and put it on from the bottom, take the cotter pin, put it in place, bend the cotter pin. Okay, now, if you'll notice right here, this lock is not engaging, and so it has to be adjusted. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push up from the bottom, I'm going to spin the whole assembly down. And if you'll notice, you got a nut on the top right here, and as you tighten down on that nut, as you move this back and forth, you tighten down on the nut so it engages. So it's very simple, really. I like to do this with a flathead screwdriver that I'll go get, push it forward, tighten it in place, and it'll be good to go. Now it's time to put on our last hydraulic hose. I'll connect this down at the bottom. I've already put Teflon tape in place. Next we have our T fittings. This is a T going into an adapter that we've already put together. You'll notice that there's Teflon tape already on everything. Screw this into place, into the power unit. Let me go ahead and give you a heads up that getting the pressure on this fitting, the tension on it just right is what keeps it from sealing. So be prepared that you're probably going to have to adjust it in order to get it to seal and to work right. Next, we'll install these little clamps to the side of the towers. There's a few on each side. Basically, all they do is keep your hydraulic lines out of the way. Now it's time to go ahead and hook up the overhead safety cutoff. A lot of lifts have an overhead padded cutoff bar, but this one in particular has a safety cutoff cable. So it's real simple. All I'm going to do is take my stuff and hook it in place. Here, Dexron Mercon automatic transmission fluid is used. Okay, so we've put our other loop mount up on this tower just as we did the first one. And now we're going to take our little supplied cable clamp, run the cable through it, run it through our safety shutoff, loop it back around. And now, if we've got the tension in the cable adjusted properly, you'll find that only if you pull just a little bit of tension on the cable will it pull your switch up. And so if I were to run the lift and put a little tension on the cable, it cuts it off. That's how you know that you've got the safety cutoff cable adjusted to the proper tension. We went ahead and makeshift wired up the lift, the motor here for testing. You do want to make sure that your lift is wired up by a professional electrician, and you do get a receipt for his work, because should something happen to your power unit, the manufacturer may very well ask to see where it was wired up by a professional before honoring the warranty on your power unit. Okay, one of the most important pieces of preventative maintenance that you can do for your lift is to grease the insides of the towers. You've got plastic slider blocks up inside all four corners, and they serve for a bushing in between the carriage and the tower. And if you don't grease the insides of these towers and keep them greased, those plastic slider blocks will rub away, and you'll be replacing them when your lift gets rickety very quickly. So be sure to grease this. So just put plenty of grease up in the inside corners of this machine. Before greasing the insides of these towers, make sure that there's no weld splatter inside that was left over from welding the safety locks in place. If there was weld splatter up inside the corners, we recommend removing those with a chisel or a flathead screwdriver or something of that nature so that they don't eat up your slider blocks. We did that beforehand. This lift is fine, so now we're going to raise it up and grease underneath. Okay, now it's time to adjust the equilibrium cables to make sure that the carriages from one side to the other are level as the car raises. Let me show you what it's doing right now prior to being adjusted. And if you notice that side of the car, the passenger side of the car, is too low. And the way that you solve this problem is you tighten on these cables over on the top side on the high side. So I'm going to lower the vehicle back down and adjust. And that's all you have to do to adjust the cables to make sure that the carriages are level from side to side. It was just a simple adjustment. If I had gone too much or too little, you would adjust the cables again and repeat the process until you got it right. I just so happens I got it right the very first time. We appreciate you taking the time to watch our video. You can see all of the car lifts that we sell, including this 9,000-pound clear floor lift that we've installed today at our website, redlinestands.com. Thank you.